Welcome to the CDAIO Magazine interview series. I'm Amy Jones with EY. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Paula Osborn, Deputy Chief AI and Data Officer at the Department of State. Thanks for joining us today, Paula.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
Can you share some examples of how data and AI are impacting diplomatic decision-making or international relations?
It's been super exciting to see the development of this and like the impacts we're able to make. I'll say we're always talking about data-informed diplomacy, but really like the first step, especially with sort of like change management and getting people on board, is time savings. And if we're able to show, the working level that, and even like leadership, that AI is going to save them time, they will leverage it, right? Like telling them like, oh, it's going to help with your decision making process. A lot of them again are like, okay, cool, but I have my own ways of making decisions, like my, 40 years of knowledge. It's a little harder to get in, but if we're like, we can save you 10 hours a week of time, they're like, where do I sign up? So that has been our sort of like most, the messaging that we've been pushing the most, and use cases that we've been getting from people in sort of like our maturity on like data and AI. So some examples are, one, we have a D-class project. So in the State Department, when you write a diplomatic cable, on any sort of topic, it is classified. And depending on the classification level, as long as it's not, the highest level, after 25 years, it becomes unclassified. But you need someone to go through it and redact any information that could potentially put the US at risk before it's released. And so up until us working with this particular office, it was done manually by a team of individuals who actually like go through and do the redactions themselves, which has been okay. But we are reaching the point, doing the math backwards, of the boom of the internet. And as you can imagine, like with that, the amount of these diplomatic correspondence goes way, way up, or diplomatic cables. And it would just become untenable to keep up in the coming years. And so our analytics team created a model that is able to predict with an extremely high accuracy, using training data. Luckily, we had tons of training data on what had been redacted, decades and decades and decades, that we're able to feed into an AI model, which now it's able to take cables and then redact the sensitive information, itself, and predict what would need to be redacted. And even still, we still have humans spot checking to make sure that the model is accurate. But it's not only saving a lot of time, but it is taking a process that would have become, we wouldn't be able to keep up with in a couple of years. Making it completely doable.
Such an exceptional example of capacity building, truly.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's one example we like to talk about a lot.
You actually you sort of merged two thoughts, which is, the internet 25 years ago maybe made a data a lot more accessible, and now here we are trying to understand the data. How do you see in this use case in particular, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, the model that's been trained evolving? Because I think probably those diplomatic cables and the context that's within them is going to be a lot more complicated. So how do you see this tool moving with the department?
Yeah, so that was a different model that we created for the declassification. Our StateChat model, there's sort of like, I feel like, unlimited possibilities and unlimited sort of like visions of what this could be. The most exciting and the one that we get asked about the most is the integration of cables into the StateChat system, which would be just such a huge game changer for the work that we do. Because it is it's the largest amount of internal data that we have at the State Department, our cables. So if we were able to query, the cables, there's just so much we'd be able to get out of it. I'd say, in thinking about the way that the department is structured, we have, people working in particular countries, and then we have regional desks and people working on particular countries on those regional desks. But there's not so much bandwidth to do, trends across the region, trends across the globe, which is something that models are really good at finding, trends. And so, I mean, just using that as an example of like what StateChat could do with the ingestion of cables, as well as making it easier for any new Foreign Service officer that goes out to post if they want to know, who are the contacts that we meet with most, what are the priorities of this particular country on emerging technology or anything else. There's just sort of like, that would really be sort of like the next massive game changer. And I think that would really supercharge our ability to do data-driven, data-informed diplomacy, because it's not only using, external data, but then we could put that together with our internal data, which would give us such rich data for making decisions.
We said diplomacy a couple of times. One of the things that comes to mind is we've been talking about it in the context of international diplomacy and the mission set for Department of State. OMB 2410 talked a lot about sort of interagency cooperation and a different kind of diplomacy. How has that been with Department of State? And I know there's sort of been an outsized role there given the complexity of your mission set, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Working with the interagency?
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely. So being a leader, a lot of what we currently do is helping other departments navigate getting their own systems, upskilling a lot of the work that we've been doing. There's a lot of interagency working groups that we sit on and co-chair, but really like what would be, again, another big game changer would be data sharing in between agencies. And, again, another layer of data that we could use for decision making would be really, really big. So we are in discussions with a bunch of different departments in the federal government in figuring out how we can broker data sharing between our agencies. Of course, with legacy data systems, even within the State Department, it's tougher to share data than actually, probably anyone in the data world would be like, of course, it's difficult to share data with legacy systems. But I think, some others outside of the data world don't quite know how difficult it is to do that with legacy systems. But it's something that we're navigating internally as well as externally with the interagency. Like, we're definitely in lockstep with them, meeting with the other chief data officers and so forth. Like, we're definitely like trying to move in unison on this.
Paula, this was such an exceptional conversation, and I'm really excited, especially Department of State and the mission that you have, but really setting the tone for other agencies and even industry, what's possible. Really
Thanks,
thrilled. And
Amy.
thank you so much for sharing all this incredible information.
I've loved chatting with you. Thank you for the time.
All right. Thanks, Paula Osborn, for joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.